Good evening and welcome to SCOTONOMICS episode 67. Thanks to everyone who's joining us this evening. As you may know, if you're on YouTube, we're going out on the SCOTONOMICS YouTube channel tonight and not the Indie Live channel, as they've had a few issues with scheduling. But while you're here, please do subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, please jump over to YouTube and subscribe on our YouTube channel, because this is where all of our content, our free content during our Festival of Economics, is going out on this channel. So if you want to see some of the free sessions, we've got 3 or 4 free sessions across the weekend. They'll be on this channel. And before we get into tonight's episode, I'd like to show you just a little bit more information about our Festival of Economics coming up in just over 2 weeks' time. If you haven't seen that before, I hope you enjoyed it. That's just a little bit of an introduction to our Festival of Economics in just over 2 weeks' time. One of the things we will be talking about, of course, is about energy and how that impacts the Scottish economy. Before we get into tonight's session, which is looking at energy supply, use and generation in Scotland in detail, I'd like to say hello to my co-host, Kieran Van Sweden.
Hello.
Hello, Kieran. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Nice to see you this evening. And please do say hello to us on the comments. It'd be nice to hear from you. Kieran, any thoughts on Scotland's issues with energy, electricity and gas before we head into tonight's session?
Yeah, well, a relevant thing that came up on another podcast called Scotland's Choice was an interview with Anne McLaughlin, who is fighting hard against these energy meters that the poorest in society are forced to take on, and she's working really hard in Westminster to do something about that. So I think that's really important to support her as much as possible and follow what she's doing with that, because it really is a nefarious practice.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be targeting the poorest in society, expect them to pay more than everyone else. Well, tonight's session, so Chris highlights kind of 3 major problems with energy. It's too expensive, too much of the profit disappears out of the community, and thirdly, too much of it's generated by fossil fuels. So using a successful example in Denmark of natural energy grids, Chris, who's from Island Power, discusses how the Danes moved away from a national grid and how Scottish communities can do the same. Now, he also discusses his ideas for a new local and more democratic approach to energy supply. Now, this is only one idea. I quite liked it, but there's also a few issues with it, which I didn't raise with Chris during the session, but it'd be interesting to see what you think, Kieran, and also our viewers. But a really interesting approach, and certainly any move away from fossil fuels, from the privatised multinational energy companies, is certainly a step in the right direction. So please enjoy the session, and we'll see you after. Chris Cook, thank you very much for joining us on episode 67 of SCOTONOMICS.
Well, my pleasure, William. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's going to be a really interesting conversation, as I think we're going to kind of deep delve into the issues and also some of the potential solutions to the problems we have in Scotland and in the UK with energy supply and generation. So would you like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what's your involvement with Island Power?
Yes, thank you. Well, eclectic background, started out in working in government service in the insolvency, fraud investigation in the 70s, got into city regulation in the mid-80s when it first began, and because there wasn't any before then. And this was in the commodity markets. The regulation of the commodity markets took me to become a director of the International Petroleum Exchange, as it then was, which was growing rapidly at the time. And I found I had a talent for sort of the legal and financial side of it and the development of it. So I was actually responsible for the legal design, let's call it that, of the UK natural gas balancing point futures contract. Not the physical market, you understand, of buying and selling CH4 molecules for profit, which is problematic, shall we say, but the actual way in which the risk management could be done to manage the risks of trading gas for profit. Okay, so I was involved in that. And since then, you could say in a process of action research, learning by doing, mainly where I live in Linlithgow, experimenting and looking at ways in which we can come up with bottom-up means of delivering the services which we need to live, the utilities in particular.
Before we get into the solutions, I'd like to say to you, well, what's wrong? What's the problem? Why do we need different solutions? So if we're looking at the way that we consume and generate energy, and let's stick with Scotland for the moment. What are the problems that you're trying to solve?
Well, it's too damn expensive. It's far more expensive than it needs to be. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, having a relatively high-priced energy does encourage people to save it. But the point is that huge amounts of money are being paid, uniquely huge amounts of money being paid for power and gas supply in this country. And massive, colossal windfall profits are being made by the producers with no effort on their part. I don't begrudge anybody making a profit, provided there is effort on their part. But these are windfall and entirely, I would say undeserved. And you've heard of the expression peak oil, of course. I've come up with an expression peak rent. Okay, that basically the demands to pay debt and the demands to pay rent have reached a point at which it is no longer sustainable. So I think we are at an inflection point, not just in Scotland, but everywhere else. But it's particularly the case in Scotland because, of course, in the far north, heat and power are more critical than they are maybe the further south and more hospitable the climate.
Well, even further south in Scotland and of course further south in the British Isles, there's a big difference between the importance and the amount of energy used. There's also a difference between the amount of energy potential that's generated. Scotland per capita has a high percentage of potential for renewable energy generation. So if the problem is cost to the consumer and unfair profits to the generators, where do you fit in this kind of justice in the terms of amount of energy that could be supplied to what people are paying in parts of Scotland?
So far the focus, and it's not just what you're saying, William, it's generally the focus is always on renewables in terms of supply. And we shall talk about the justice and the distribution of supply. I'm probably more interested in demand. There is not enough said. And this is most of my work that I've been working on has been, well, how can we actually look at the question of demand? Because if you think about it, saving energy is done at the retail price, whereas renewable, we're selling for 5 pence what we buy back for 35. That's the problem with renewables. In a sense, it is this profit maximizing middleman market. Now, everything I've been doing has been looking at both. I'm completely in favor of renewables, and yes, justice we'll come back to the supply. But what has not been focused upon, because there is no interest on the part of people actually supplying energy to reduce consumption of it. That's one of the problems. So to actually come up with a mechanism whereby we can invest in energy savings and come up with, shall we say, enterprise models and instruments that enable this to happen, that is what my focus has been starting in Linlithgow a decade ago. And that's something I will definitely talk about because it is so relevant. You and I, we don't use oil and gas. We don't even use electricity. We use heat. We use power, mobility, light, nutrition, even water. And these are services. So to actually provide services in the most efficient way possible, that is what our focus in terms of resilience is all about.
One of the points you've made there is that the importance of focusing on the ends rather than the means. And I think too often we have too much of our policy discussion is around the means rather than the ends. And what you're saying is it's not, we don't need electricity per se. We need to be able to do the things that electricity or power or gas allows us to do, and have a bit more of a focus on that. So that's an interesting perspective. But I want to kind of dig into this idea that we need to concentrate much more on demand. Would you like to kind of explain why you think that's the case and why that's so important, and also why no one's really focusing on that?
Not necessarily use less energy, but to use it more efficiently, because in this progress of oil and gas, from you hear the expression from well to wheel, from when it comes out of the well and ends up as light or heat. That is where there is a colossal, huge set of savings to be made, because for every 1 kilowatt hour of heat that is delivered to me, there might be 10 kilowatt hours of energy equivalent coming out of the well, because there has so much been lost in that chain of pumping the gas to the power station, losses at the power station in heat, then distributing the electricity with losses all the way along, and then converting it. So for 1 unit of energy actually delivered, there is a massive opportunity. I think it's the greatest opportunity of the 21st century of coming up with smart ways of efficient delivery of energy. So the long answer is, I don't necessarily think we need to use less. We just need to use it much more intelligently and deliver it in terms of with renewables. So, I think we might even have an abundance of energy, but it's energy as delivered, as distinct from what's going in at the well, or at the well, which needs to be, extinguished really over time, which it will be, because it's running out anyway.
I think that's an important point to emphasize, because a lot of people won't be aware that it's as high in terms of the amount of energy lost from.
It's colossal.
It's absolutely huge. And of course you can reduce that by a lot more. Obviously you can never reduce it to 100%. So is that where a big part of your focus is trying to increase the efficient use of energy?
Absolutely. And it's following the example of what the Danes did. It's a great example. After there was the energy shock in 1973. You're probably too young to remember this, William, but the oil price went up 4 times. It went from $3 to $12 a barrel, and the Danes didn't have any oil and gas to speak of, and they had a sort of oh shit moment at that point, as a nation, and they basically came out with a policy, a very simple, pragmatic strategy, which we lack in this country and the UK. They said this: well, for any given use of energy, so energy delivered, heat was needed there, power, mobility, for any given use of energy, we will minimize the oil and gas we use, right? Very simple. I call that least carbon fuel cost, or least resource cost. That is an organizing principle of policy. And they did that. It wasn't the least Danish kroner cost, or that was not a consideration. It was a resilient strategy. And that is what they have applied over a period of 50 years. And it's all the presentations I make have an image in them of a picture, an image of the grid of Denmark. This was in 1990, where you have about 10 big red spots, which are the power stations, fossil fueled. And then by 2014, 24 years later, it looks as though measles has broken out, because there are wind turbines, community-owned wind turbines everywhere. There is combined heat and power, which to me is very important, because that is, so I'll give you an example. In Copenhagen, what they did was, big fossil fuel power station, they just took waste heat from it, took hot water, delivered it with 150 kilometers of hot water piping, you didn't get the choice, you were connected to it. And what did that do? That captured 30% of waste heat going up the chimneys and delivered it as heat to people. And then they started doing that all over Denmark, and there were reasons they could afford to do that. So what we are lacking, or we have differently, are the institutions. We privatized everything. They didn't, at that time. So what we need to do, I believe, is to apply that principle of least carbon fuel cost. And the good news is that because the price is as high as it now is, it now makes economic sense, even under sterling economics, as I call it, not energy economics, sterling economics. We've reached the point at which we can now say, William, well, it makes sense economically to save carbon fuel because it's got so damn expensive. So what used to be a bit of a luxury when the Danes were doing it and actually cost you money in dollar terms actually is now the smart thing to do. So that's what's changed and why I'm actually optimistic about the future, because we can actually apply that principle, which we don't. We currently have sterling economics when what we should be doing is looking at what the Danes did, which is essentially applying energy economics. And for the last 10 years, that's essentially what I've been working on. How can we actually, using what tools can we apply those economics? So that's a long introduction, but it is possible to do.
Yeah,
absolutely possible.
We're in a situation now where you're saying it's economically viable to make those changes. What impact does the ecological argument for these changes add to your persuasive argument?
Well, the trouble is that the ecological argument is divisive, very divisive. I'm not commenting as to rights and wrongs, climate change or anything. I'm just saying, don't go there if you don't have to. If you've got an argument that the higher the carbon fuel cost, the more profit there is in saving it, well, guess what the outcome of doing that is, William? If you save carbon fuel use, you automatically save CO2. So it doesn't matter then if you're a climate fanatic. Sorry, I don't like to use that word because I actually believe in the climate change subject, but some people are fanatical about it. Some people are fanatical against it. Other people are agnostic. And I'm saying, no need to go there, not now, because it makes more sense to save it economically than not. And here's how. So I think the sting is being taken out of those, emotive, sometimes political, conflicts. And we can say, well, don't go there. Just,
Well, I mean, I can certainly understand your perspective on that. But, science is not a political football to be kicked about, and there's a huge there's a huge issue with the climate and the burning of fossil fuels. Because
completely.
The economic argument can change, but the argument that we are facing a climate catastrophe cannot change. But if the price of oil and fossil fuels does reduce quite substantially, then your argument becomes quite difficult again, doesn't it? If you've not underpinned by this, I think much bigger argument that we can't keep burning fossil fuels, we have to move to renewable.
Well, can I say that my argument is also based on a trend where, when I first came along into this subject, we were burning maybe 1 barrel of carbon fuel to extract 35. Now, all the easy oil, as a friend of mine calls it, all the easy oil and gas has been found, has been developed, has been extracted. And what we're seeing, William, is that it's called the energy return on energy invested is rising. And we have, I would call it, an irresistible force of this trend. In other words, all the easy oil is going because it's finite. And this trend is actually rising. And then on top, you have this point that we've reached what I call peak rent. In other words, we can't afford to pay more than a certain amount. So what we're seeing is actually a squeeze going on, and there is no option. There is no option other than to go down the road I'm describing. I take your point completely, but the point is that we have exploited all the easy oil and easy gas. And what we're now doing is dabbling in things like horrendous stuff, which is, like the tar sands. That's one barrel for 3 or 4 delivered. You see the point that the trend, in a sense, is actually defusing the point that you made there. There's no option. We're running out of the stuff. Okay.
Yeah. No,
Does
absolutely. Well, I think what you're saying is, we're coming at the same thing from 2 different directions.
Yes.
You're saying there's no option because we're running out, and the price is becoming more expensive. And my point is, well, it doesn't really matter if it's cheap or if it's expensive, because if we keep burning it, there'll be a climate catastrophe. So we're kind of saying, but the point that we're getting at is that we have to change from fossil fuel to much more renewable. How are we moving? How are you preparing to support countries, regions, communities, towns to move from fossil fuels to renewable? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of at the basis of your strategy.
Absolutely. Well, 10 years ago in Linlithgow, we launched it was called the Linlithgow Natural Grid Strategy. And the aim of the natural grid, because what we're saying is what Denmark have done is to go from a national grid to a natural grid based on mobilizing natural resources. It's a lovely expression that describes, what a decentralized distributed grid looks like. Now, the aim of the Linlithgow natural grid was and is to make Linlithgow independent in energy and in energy use. That was the aim, and hence it would be resilient. And we held meetings, we had academics, a whole group of them come up with ideas. And then, of course, the idea is, well, let's have a pilot scheme. But the first thing we did, William, was we mapped energy use, because you have to be in a position to judge, has this intervention that you make actually work? So what did we do? We collected invoices. Okay, we didn't realize it, but that's essentially a shared ledger, which is in vogue these days, a shared ledger. So we came up with the idea, well, we'll map energy use, we'll make an intervention, and then we can judge how much, the effect of our intervention has been made. And energy is unique in that way. It's not subjective, it's objective. You can't argue with energy use figures, you see. So we came up with a project called Heat from the Street. That was the idea was to take solar panels on the Venel over there and use it not to sell energy into the grid for 5 pence and buy about 35, but to supply it to drive a heat pump, taking waste heat out of the sewers, because 35% or so, up to 30% of what we actually use goes down the plug hole and into the sewers at maybe 17, 21 degrees. And the technology to extract heat with a heat pump's been around 30 odd years. So this combination of supply, not sale, supply of power to drive a heat pump to deliver heat into local buildings and through a heat network. And we call that heat from the street. Now, the business model was not to sell heat, which happens everywhere else in Scotland. It was to supply the use of heat in exchange for a proportion of the savings of gas and electricity. Okay, so we call it heat as a service, and it's essentially delivering a utility. And the business model that we use, William, this is the beauty to me, was piloted by James Watt in 1778, when he didn't sell his new condensing boilers to the Cornish tin mines who had a water pumping problem. He supplied the use of it in exchange for a third of the coal they saved at the retail price as delivered to Cornwall. So the better his pump worked, the more coal he got. And you can see that this use model of provision, in his case of pumping as a service, is delivering savings. And I think of it as a smart swap. It's the use of what's in here, in James Watt's head, of this new condensing boiler. He got a percentage of carbon fuel saved at the retail price, right? That model can and will be, in my view, applied throughout Scotland, because it simply works. The provision of heat as a service to the local flats and public buildings in exchange for a proportion of the gas and electricity being used at the retail price is compelling. It worked 10 years ago. It treble works now. So we can actually come back to that and actually apply a model of don't buy the equipment, bring the equipment in on a service basis, on a supply. Think of it as a production sharing lease. Okay, in a sense, a leasing model. It's an entirely different commercial model, and it's win-win. Scottish Water have been actually applying the extraction of waste heat in Galashiels, Stirling, several other places. Heat from the street as a concept is being applied professionally now, and I don't think it would have started without our catalyst. So I'll stop at that.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this idea of using the heat that's waste heat and is just is in the system has been around for decades. And you mentioned what they've been doing in Copenhagen. So take this back to the Scottish Scottish context then. So the approach would be going to a community, let's say a town like Linlithgow, and saying this is what we're able to do. We're able to I used that phrase earlier of democratize the energy supply, whereas you're not generating energy, sending it to the grid and then buying it back. You're actually providing the heat within the community, and that leads into a smaller, because let's get to the kind of the bare bones of it, that leads into a smaller price that you're paying for your heat.
What happens if you make energy cheap, William? People tend to use more of it. And the Jevons paradox, academics call it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, we have a solution for that too. The idea is quite simple, that we set the price at a level, and it is at a high level right now. And basically, part of our model is to deliver a surplus, but to distribute that surplus, part of it, to the community I think of it as an energy dividend, literally as an energy dividend. And think of it a bit like as an energy treasury, and I'll come back to that briefly. Because what we can do is we wouldn't be distributing money, because if we did that to people in fuel poverty, it would affect the benefits. Okay, so you don't do that. But what you can do is distribute energy credits. They already, Big Six already do. They give energy credits out to people in fuel poverty, but it's basically every supplier has their own credit, which depends on the tariff that they charge. What we would be doing is say, okay, here's an energy credit worth 10 kilowatt hours equivalent, or a unit of gas or whatever it is. So it doesn't have a pound sign in front of it. You see the difference? It doesn't have a pound sign. And if we can deliver an energy dividend, as we would call it, to people, as the community decide, then in that case, what we're saying is we're giving people the means to pay. So you keep the price at a standard, call it a market standard, at a standard price, but then start giving people the means to pay, both from renewable energy production, which is giving new flows of energy, and also from the shared savings. So there are two angles to this. One is new production, one is shared savings. And it was renewable production that gave me the idea of the energy treasury, and I'll tell you for why. I went to an all energy show in Glasgow about 6-7 years ago, and somebody from Stornoway stood up and made a presentation on behalf of, I think it was the Point and Sandwick Trust. You've probably come across them. And it was astonishing. He said that there were 3 wind turbines developed privately near Stornoway, and they pay a dividend, well, not a dividend, a community payment of £6,000 per megawatt per year. And that added up to £54,000 per year from 3 times 3 megawatt turbines. That was a private sector, private developed project. And it pays a Crofton community 54,000 quid a year. Not bad, eh? Well, Point and Sandwick did it themselves by every means possible. Brilliant what they did. Same 3 wind turbines. Do you know how much they get? It's not 54 grand a year. 900,000 and 2 million when the debt's paid off. And that's before we even look at the astonishing prices in energy, which we now have. So I was astonished. I worked in the city. I'm used to greed. I couldn't believe how greedy the developers are being. It's no wonder they want to come back on shore, because
Well, interesting, Chris. That's the I think the government, the Scottish government, have a recommendation of about £5,000 per I think it's gigawatt. You know, so these developers are not, you know, the bar's being set by the Scottish government.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a really low bar, and the Scottish government could be saying you actually have to pay 10 times that, and there's no statutory requirement for wind turbines, but there isn't even a guidance for offshore wind turbines. So there's a huge issue around the Scottish government's involvement with the private sector in terms of these community payments. I know that's a side issue, but I'd love to come back to this idea of community generation. I mean, are you saying that this is a purely community generated power solution, or is this a kind of private partnership? Public-private partnership.
It's a mutual solution. We think of it as it being either or, you know, it's either public or private. But, you know, in Scotland, you've got guilty, not guilty, and not proven. There is this third space, which is not public, not private, but can be both. Because what we can do is we can strip out of the model something for nothing. Because that is essentially what is being stripped out. People are getting something for taking no, you know, something for nothing, essentially. That's the danger of what's called technically economic rent. It's, you know, there's this technical expression of getting some.
And can you explain at the moment, who is it that's getting that economic rent?
Well, developers, number one, are getting some. They are their model. I call it the 4 Bs: buy, borrow, build, and bugger off. Okay, when what should be going on is development as a service, because it's a valuable service, and to bring in the wind turbine manufacturers not as providers of a commodity, but like James Watt did, supplying it in exchange for a percentage of the flow of energy that comes from it. And the beauty of that for wind turbine manufacturers who are losing huge amounts of money, believe it or not, it's the developers are making the money. The wind turbine manufacturers are not having a great time. So if they actually invest the value of their wind turbines in exchange for a percentage of what comes, well, that means that a community is much better placed to actually bring them in as partners to provide the service, etc., etc. So the people who won't be involved in this are people who are extracting rent from it. The colossal returns of equity owners, massive returns, unwarranted returns. You know, I'm fine with them making a developer making a return on the build phase, no problem at all, but not for the next 20 years at that rate.
But aren't the people who are providing the windmills, the wind turbines, they're receiving a rent?
Well, no, they're not. They're making their money on selling their kit, and they're screwed by developers. And they're a cost to a developer. Everything's a cost, William. You know, the equipment. I'm just trying to
clarify, because you've said if the wind turbines have been provided to the community and they're receiving an annual payment for the use of those wind turbines, then that's a rent.
Well, wait a minute. 2 phases. One is development. So the wind turbine manufacturer would participate in the uplift. You know, maybe it takes 2 years to build, whatever it takes. So they would get back their investment plus a surplus. Okay. Once it's finished, once it's there and running, then what you have is an operating cost. So, of course, the wind turbine manufacturer would be paid for keeping and this already exists. Enercon have been doing this. They call it the Enercon partnership for years. Because they trust their gear, they don't have a gearbox, therefore they are more reliable. They have long since given basically they get a percentage of the production in exchange for providing the wind turbine. Yeah. But what they haven't done, William, is participate in the development. Right, that's the key. It's to come up with a better development model, which is the key to this, because that is where huge amounts of profit, huge levels of profit have been extracted. And I think we can do that in a much better way. And also, can I say, accelerating the development, because what Island Power does, this is what we aim to do through applying these mutual models, is to accelerate it. We're in a crisis. We need to accelerate the response, but we're in all these impossibly convoluted and complex and conflicted and costly mechanisms, and what is needed is a simple, effective one that works for all.
There are a lot of community energy projects across Scotland, isn't there? This, you know, there's, you know, I'd imagine there's probably into the hundreds now. Could you tell us a little bit about the success that those other types of projects are having in, you know, reducing the amount of energy that's used, or the amount of the cost, or the amount of money that's been sent kind of outside of the community?
Yeah, I mean, the Community Energy Scotland, for instance, and Local Energy Scotland, who we work very closely with, and Lithgow, have done a great job with relatively small resources. I mean, they're brilliant, and I work with them. I've worked with them both, but the problem is, and having worked in Linlithgow with a community development trust and set up organisations, and it's all been about, well, how can we come up with a mechanism that works better? And unfortunately, there are complexities there because of the legal shape of these things, and also the financing tools that are available are not as good as maybe as they could be. So I'll give you an example. You have community benefit societies, which are, you know, essentially a company, but with the incentives, made more mutual, shall we say? But the trouble there is that they're giving the same return to investors during the development phase as they do in the long term, right? And it's arguable that the return an investor gets is too small for the risk he's taking during development, and yet way too high for the next 20 years. Because to pay a 5% return, or even 7% return for 20 years on a utility, which is what we're talking about, is arguably too high. And what I'm looking at is, well, how can we actually bring in other ways in which, say, pension funds could invest in the long term? And what I think is possible for all these communities is to say, well, maybe we can actually refinance what you've done and deliver you more in a non-toxic way, and deliver you more capital to do more of what you want to do. Because there's a shortage of development finance for communities, William. That's the trouble. I know, I've experienced it.
The last thing I wanted to quickly discuss was this idea of democracy, because I think a lot of people, when they're looking at energy, and this is why I really like this idea of the not the national grid, but was it the natural grid?
Natural grid.
Yeah. And this is much more kind of subsidiarity, and this is allowing energy to be administered and looked after at the lowest level possible, which is closest to the people who are using it. So in terms of the democracy and the democratization of energy, was that a major driver to your ideas?
Oh, completely. I was a member of a housing co-op in London for years, and I didn't have a freehold or a leasehold or a license. I was a member of something called a friendly society, which is a rather nice name. And that gave me the right to live somewhere. So I talk about Linlithgow Unlimited, which would basically be an association of energy users. The local council I'm chair of is an association. It's not a corporate like they are in England and Wales. It's not a government as an organisation. It's an idea, William, of a government that you're part of, that you're a member of. And the idea that you can be a member of a local energy user group, which then doubles as an energy treasury, issuing our own energy checks. I'm sorry, I'm just going off on one here, but just imagine it. Because
I think it's very empowering, you know, and I think that the more tentacles within the society and community that we have, and the more powerful those connections. So I think these things are incredibly important. And I think at the level we look at energy with a lot of issues when we're discussing reserved or devolved powers, it's like, well, you know, the option isn't Westminster or Holyrood. The discussion has to be, where should that power be best held? And that can be at the local level, the national level, the regional level, or the international level. And I don't think we discuss enough of community level as an option and an opportunity for the destination for a lot of these powers.
That is so well put, William. So well put. Because energy is delivered as a service. Care is delivered as a service. And inherently, that's at local level. So if we can come up with the agreements to deliver these things at local level, that is the ideal. It's a sort of bottom-up approach. rather than a top-down approach. And the government needs to facilitate this, in my view. And the banking system needs to facilitate this. I think of banking as a service. I think of development as a service, and get away from this transactional model and extractive model of profit from everything, and come up with basically a society of mutual agreements. Because at the end of the day, I do think that's possible, but we need to test it, suck it and see. I'm all about action, research, learning by doing.
So moving forward, where are the next steps for you in terms of, you know, having a region or a town or a city who's actually taking this forward?
Well, I'm pleased to say that we have an island doing it on the other side of the world. A little island called Niue, Niue, is a pilot for a greater network. We call that the Pacific Natural Grid. I mean, it was announced just a month or so ago. It's been quietly bubbling under for some time, you know, and it's an island of 2,000 people. And the aim of the Niue Natural Grid will be to make Niue independent in energy. You can imagine the cost of delivering fuel to the middle of the Pacific, you know, and that's what they run on. You know, their little grid is distinctly not a natural grid. So, you know, and the more you can save, the better it is for the island to make themselves energy. It's a bit like egg, except, well, it's bigger than egg. It's, you know, but the principle's the same, William, that if you can save energy in a remote island, the return on that is great financially, but also excellent for the people who live there in terms of resilience. Yeah,
absolutely.
So it is, we are coming up with a proof of concept, but it's not in Scotland yet, but we aim to change that.
Best of luck with that. It sounds like a really interesting idea, and it would be great to have a Scottish pilot. And certainly, know we do have people who watch who are in this kind of community energy space, but also our politicians. This sounds like a really good idea for us to get behind and support. Chris, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, William.
It's been fascinating, and best of luck.
Thank you very much. Yep. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Well, firstly, thanks very much to Chris for that interview. Karen, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what Chris really highlights is the dysfunctionality of our energy system, I think, as well. And also the need for, again, resilience, that it's more controlled at a local level, subsidiarity. I think these are things that I think a lot of us are really starting to realise is important for our, you know, and for resilience, you know. Also, that easy oil has been extracted. I think that's, you know, that's something that I've read several times that I think people need to be aware of, and that's why it's becoming more and more expensive actually to take oil out of the North Sea, because the energy required to go in there, it's more energy required to bring it out than is coming out. So it doesn't make sense now. And I noticed
we're getting very close to that. Yeah,
they're moving away from the North Sea for that reason.
Yeah. No, I think those are good points to pick out. One thing I wanted to mention was resilience. One of the best ways to be resilient is to have a variety of different ways to do something.
Yeah.
And one of the main reason that the UK economy has is in such poor shape is because it's got no resilience. Everything, or lots of things, tend to be done the same way. And if we think about energy, you know, everyone's connected to the grid. Everyone takes it from the grid. And, you know, so these are issues that, you know, we've got to try and address. And I said, I think I've got a couple of issues with what Chris was suggesting, but it's much more important to have a variety of different ways to produce energy than it is just relying on one thing. Because even if you think it's the one best way, if that goes down, then you're in a whole heap of problems. So it would be really good if we could get a Scottish pilot going for Chris's idea. It was interesting. We had a little discussion around rent, and he didn't think that the companies were earning rent, and I think that they did. And I was going by the definition that's in the book, Rentier Capitalism, that basically if you're not doing anything and if you're earning from it, then you can class that as rent. So it's quite interesting that he had that more kind of traditional view of rent, but there was certainly an outflow of revenue from the community in terms of rent. So I thought that was quite interesting.
The other thing that was interesting as well was the knowledge about the Scottish Water and heat from the street, and how Scottish Water were already utilising spare heat.
Yeah. So these things are happening. These things are happening already. I also think that the point that he mentioned that and I asked him to repeat it because I don't think that many people are aware of it, but there's such a huge amount of energy lost in the transfer from it being generated to it being used. Sometimes up to 90% of the energy just disappears before it gets to your socket at home. So there's a huge amount of energy savings that we can make. And, you know, there's a lot of things like smart grids. You know, these are things to try and reduce that amount of energy that's lost. And then hopefully, if you reduce the amount of energy that's lost, then the amount of energy that you use overall has to come down. And that was another area that we seem to have a little bit of a disagreement when he was saying, no, it's not about reducing energy use. And I was saying it's fundamentally is about reducing energy use. And if you're making a profit and it's reduced by people reducing their energy use, then there's bound to be issues with that and the economic model that they had. But, you know, fundamentally, there's only so much energy that can be used in the globe, and then the global north have to start using less and the global south have to start using more. So no matter how you look at that, the economics of it, all of our communities have to use less energy than they do at the moment. So I don't think that was quite built into Chris's model. But as I said, I'm sure I would have issues with everything and all the models, and the resilience is the most important thing. Please do drop your comments or on tonight's show. Kieran, any final thoughts before we disappear?
Yeah, no, just I think it's important that people are aware of how much energy is wasted through the energy traveling, and we really have to look at other models. I think that's really important, and I think it's something that's definitely very topical right now. I think people are really starting to examine this.
Sorry, Kieran, I think I left you hanging there. Apologies for that. Yeah, thanks so much for your couple of comments. I actually zoomed in on my screen and I lost all of the controls, so I had to just refresh and come back out. Kieran, thanks so much. Just to let the audience know, on Wednesday, Kieran and I are going to be speaking to John Drummond on the TNT show, ostensibly about our Festival of Economics, which I mentioned at the start of the show, but also covering some of the economic issues that we're going to be covering at the event, of which there are many. So I do hope you can join us on Wednesday on the TNT show, and that will be back on the Independence Live YouTube channel. Thanks, Julie. That's a nice comment. Thanks very much. Chris, thanks for your engagement this evening. We had some comments around the similarity with Scottish Water and the differences, but I hope we can all agree that we have to move away from the system that we have at the moment.
Yeah,
we're spending far too much money on energy, considering the amount that we can generate in Scotland, the huge amount of profits that's going to outside of the community, but also to multinational companies who are not even based in Scotland or even in the UK, and thirdly, the amount of fossil fuels that we're using. So again, thanks so much to Chris and Island Power for his ideas. Next week, we have a really interesting show. We're going to be talking about inequality and the huge impact it has on society with James Plunkett from Citizens Advice. But hopefully we'll see some of you on Wednesday. Kieran, bye for now. Bye everyone.
Bye.